Imagine stepping off a plane at Charles de Gaulle. You're expecting the postcard version of France, designer storefronts, cafe terraces stretching into the distance, and a work-life balance so relaxed it makes American hustle culture look like a prison sentence. You think you've arrived in a wealthy, confident superpower, but that's not where you landed. You've walked into a country that is quietly, politely, and very efficiently running out of money. A place where the middle class is thinning out, ambition is bleeding abroad, and the government is sitting on a debt pile so large it makes Italy look fiscally disciplined. The croissants are still great, the economics are not. This is the reality behind France's slow decline, and it's why the country is far poorer than most people realize. Let's start with something economists politely call smickification, but what most people experience as the slow suffocation of ambition. Picture a young French professional. You did everything right. You survived the classe préparatoire, earned a master's degree, learned English, and landed a respectable job in a city like Lyon or Bordeaux. Then your first paycheck hits your account. About €940 net per month, the median take-home salary in France in 2024. Half the country earns less than that. Now look at a friend who skipped college and works retail, cleaning, or food service. They're on the SMIC, the minimum wage, taking home around €1,400 net. Let that sink in. The gap between minimum wage and the middle of the income distribution is barely €500. In the US, the difference between those two worlds is enormous. In France, it's almost cosmetic. Over the past 20 years, France has compressed its entire wage structure into something flat and lifeless. Hiring workers is extremely expensive, so when the government aggressively raises the minimum wage to keep up with inflation, the bottom rises while the top stays frozen. Employers can't afford raises, so the floor keeps climbing and the ceiling never moves. 2 decades ago, only a small share of French workers earned minimum wage. Today, it's more than 17%, with millions more hovering just above it. And that does something corrosive to a society. You study for years, manage teams, carry responsibility, and end up earning barely more than someone stacking shelves. Why push harder? Why take risks? Why innovate? It's not just an economic issue, it's a motivation collapse, a system where effort and reward have drifted so far apart that work itself starts to feel pointless. And if you think low salaries are fine because healthcare is free, the housing market quickly ends that illusion. In Paris, a basic studio apartment, not luxury, not spacious, just functional, costs between €1,200 and €1,500 a month. On a median salary, living alone in the capital isn't difficult, it's impossible. Without roommates or wealthy parents, you're not living in Paris, you're surviving it. You're not building a future, you're camping indoors. And this isn't just a Paris problem. Drive a couple of hours outside the postcard neighborhoods, and you'll see another France entirely. Former industrial towns that once produced and exported real things now exist as economic museums, frozen in decline. The boutiques and cafes fade, replaced by closed factories, aging populations, and young people counting the days until they can leave. This is the part of France tourists never see, but it's where the real story is unfolding.
This is the Rust Belt of France, the forgotten France, the places most tourists never see. This is where the ghost of French industry still lingers. We like to imagine France as an industrial powerhouse. We think of Airbus, nuclear reactors, high-speed trains slicing through the countryside. And yes, those things exist, but they are leftovers from a different era, not proof of a thriving present. Here's the uncomfortable truth. France doesn't really make things anymore. Manufacturing now accounts for barely 10% of French GDP. Compare that to Germany, where it's nearly twice as high, or Italy, or even Poland. France deindustrialized faster and more aggressively than almost any other Western country. And it wasn't an accident. For decades, French policymakers were obsessed with the idea of a post-industrial society. Factories were seen as dirty, outdated, beneath a modern nation. Parisian elites wanted France to be a country of consultants, brand managers, designers, and luxury curators. They bet everything on services, tourism, and image. They bet on turning France into the world's museum. And for tourists, it worked. France became the most visited country on Earth. But you cannot build a superpower on waiters, tour guides, and souvenir shops. The fallout has been brutal. When factories disappear, so do the well-paid blue-collar jobs that hold the middle class together outside major cities. When those jobs move to Poland or China, towns don't slowly decline, they hollow out. The bakery closes, the school shrinks, the local doctor retires and is never replaced. This is where the political anger you see on the news comes from. When you see yellow vests burning toll booths and blocking roundabouts, it's not because they enjoy chaos or hate a specific president. It's because they live in these peripheral towns where the only jobs left are a supermarket and an Amazon warehouse. They are the casualties of the museum economy. While Paris sells €3,000 handbags to American tourists, the rest of the country fights over scraps. And here's the moment when the illusion completely collapses. During COVID, France realized in a panic that it could no longer manufacture basic paracetamol. The country that once symbolized scientific and industrial power had to beg India and China for painkillers. That's what happens when a nation forgets how to build. Quick pause here. If this is making your dream of moving to France feel slightly more expensive than expected, hit subscribe. We break down the dark side of the global economy every week. And tell me in the comments, would you rather earn €5,000 a month in a country with no universal health care or €1,500 in a country where it's free? I'm genuinely curious. Now let's talk about the debt bomb everyone pretends isn't ticking. You hear a lot about America's debt, but the US has a printing press and the world's reserve currency. France has neither. France uses the euro. It cannot print its way out of trouble. It depends entirely on bond markets and, frankly, German patience. In 2024, French public debt reached about 113% of GDP. For context, EU rules say member states are supposed to stay under 60%. France hasn't seen that number since dial-up internet. Here's a fun but terrifying fact. France has not passed a balanced government budget since 1974. For half a century, the state has spent more than it earns every single year. Left-wing governments, right-wing governments, centrist governments, it doesn't matter. Overspending is bipartisan. And where does the money go? Not into infrastructure, which is visibly aging, not into the military, which relies heavily on NATO. It goes into social protection. France spends an astonishing 32 to 34% of its entire GDP on social spending alone. That level of social spending is the highest on the planet, higher than Sweden, higher than Denmark. It's a welfare state on performance-enhancing drugs. And to be clear, a safety net is a good thing. It's great that people don't die on sidewalks because they can't afford insulin. But this scale of spending becomes mathematically impossible when your economy isn't growing. France is trying to finance a Rolls-Royce welfare model with the engine of a Peugeot. And the bill is no longer theoretical. It arrived. In 2024, interest payments on French debt exploded into one of the largest items in the national budget, on track to overtake education spending. Let that sink in. France is about to spend more servicing yesterday's mistakes than investing in its future children. If that doesn't qualify as poorer than you think, nothing does. And now we arrive at the great salary illusion, otherwise known as the French tax maze. If France has a world championship, beating even Brazil at football, it's taxation. Go back to that HR office for a second. Remember the salary that looked decent on paper? By the time it reached your bank account, a financial crime scene had already taken place. Here's how it works, and if you're American, you might want to sit down. Suppose a company wants to hire you for a solid mid-level job and is willing to spend €60,000 per year. That's the total cost to the employer.
The government takes the first massive bite through employer social contributions. Gone. Your gross salary, the number printed on your contract, is now around 43,000 euros. But you don't get that either. Next come employee contributions for pensions, healthcare, unemployment, and everything else. Another chunk disappears. Now you're down to roughly 33,000 euros net. But we're still not finished. You then pay income tax on that amount. By the time the money actually lands in your account to buy groceries, nearly half of what your employer paid for your labor has vanished into state coffers. France has the highest overall tax burden in the OECD. Every year, the government absorbs roughly 45 to 48% of the entire country's GDP through taxes and social charges. And this creates a slow-motion poverty trap. Companies can't pay higher net salaries because the taxes on top are crushing. Workers have little disposable income. Local economies stagnate. The government sees the stagnation and responds by raising taxes again. It's an economic boa constrictor. The squeeze is gradual, so you don't notice it at first. Then one day you try to save money at the end of the month and realize there's nothing left. And if you try to get rich, good luck. France has a deep cultural allergy to wealth. For years, it imposed a wealth tax that hit people simply for owning assets, regardless of income. It chased tens of thousands of millionaires out of the country. Macron replaced it with a real estate-focused version, but the signal is unchanged. Success is suspicious. Please apologize by handing over half. And finally, there's the ticking bomb known as retirement. You probably remember the scenes from 2023. Paris in flames, mountains of uncollected garbage, riot police charging through clouds of tear gas, all because the government proposed raising the retirement age from 62 to 64. To most of the world, this looked absurd. Germany is moving towards 67. The US and UK are not far behind. But in France, asking people to work 2 extra years was treated like a moral crime. What those protests refuse to confront is the uncomfortable truth. The French pension system is a demographic Ponzi scheme. It's pay as you go. The money taken from your paycheck today isn't being saved or invested for your retirement. It's immediately used to pay today's retirees.
It's being wired directly to a retiree right now. You're not saving for your future. You're paying for your grandmother's vacation in Nice. This system only works when you have 4 workers supporting 1 retiree. That was France in the 1960s. Today, it's closer to 1.7 workers per retiree, and that number keeps falling. France is getting old. The baby boomers are retiring en masse, and while France's birth rate is higher than much of Europe, it's nowhere near high enough to replace them. So you end up with a shrinking pool of young, underpaid workers, remember the SIMC-ification, trying to support a growing army of retirees who are living longer than ever. The math is merciless. It simply doesn't work. The pension system bleeds billions of euros every year. To stop the hemorrhage, the government has 2 options: cut pensions, which is political suicide, or raise the retirement age, which is also political suicide, just slightly slower. So the country remains frozen in denial. Young people know they will likely never receive a full pension, yet they are taxed relentlessly to fund the current one. It's an intergenerational wealth transfer in reverse, quietly making the working population poorer every single year. And that brings us to the great brain drain. Walk into a Goldman Sachs office in London, a Google campus in Zurich, or a research lab in Montreal, and look at the name badges. You'll see a surprising number of French surnames. France is exceptionally good at producing talent. Its education system, especially the elite grandes écoles, consistently churns out world-class engineers, mathematicians, and financiers. The problem is that France cannot keep them. This is the elite exodus, and it's draining the country of its most valuable resource, human capital. Imagine you're a top-tier AI researcher.
Option 1, stay in Paris, earn around 45,000 euros a year, hand over half in taxes, squeeze into a 30 square meter apartment, and navigate a rigid hierarchy where promotions take a decade. Option 2, move to California or Switzerland, earn 150,000 euros, pay lower taxes, live in a house, and lead a team immediately. That decision isn't hard. Estimates suggest between 2.5 and 3 million French citizens live abroad, but this isn't a random slice of the population. These are the risk takers, the founders, the scientists. When the smartest people leave, innovation leaves with them. This is why there is no French Google, no French Amazon, and very few globally dominant tech companies founded in France over the last 20 years. The founders left. They built Snowflake in the US. They lead major biotech and AI firms abroad. France pays for their expensive education, and other countries collect the returns. The result is a nation that feels stuck, a place where ambition has a ceiling. Stay and you accept it. Want to break through? You buy a plane ticket. And yes, it's getting a bit bleak, but stay with me because the final point is something you encounter every day without realizing what it represents. Before we get there, if you're French and watching this from London, New York, or elsewhere abroad, leave a comment. Tell us why you left. I'm willing to bet it involved taxes. And finally, there's the collapse of public services. You might say, at least healthcare is free, at least the trains are fast. Here's the painful part of the decline. The free stuff is breaking. For decades, the unspoken deal in France was simple. We take a huge share of your income, but in return, you get world-class public services. That deal no longer holds. Walk into a French emergency room today, and you might wait 10, 12, sometimes 20 hours just to be seen. There are now medical deserts across rural France where you literally cannot find a general practitioner when you need one.
Doctors are retiring faster than they're being replaced, and for decades the state kept the number of new doctors artificially low through quotas and bureaucratic choke points. The result is predictable. Entire regions are left without basic care. Look at education. French students were once global leaders in mathematics. Today, international rankings place France firmly in the middle, while inequality between students is exploding. Teachers are underpaid, exhausted, and demoralized. Recruitment has become so desperate that the government now hires underqualified staff just to put an adult in front of a classroom. Look at the justice system. It's notoriously slow, chronically underfunded, and overwhelmed. Cases drag on for years. And here's the real tragedy. The French are still paying luxury prices through massive taxes, but receiving discount-level public services. When the public sector fails, those with money quietly opt out. They send their kids to private schools. They use private clinics. They pay for private security. And that's how a two-tiered society forms. The wealthy insulate themselves from decline, while the middle class and the poor are left navigating crumbling infrastructure. The word égalité carved into town halls starts to look less like a promise and more like a punchline. And that leads to something harder to quantify but impossible to ignore: pessimism. If economics is a country's hardware, psychology is its software, and France's software is badly bugged. You might assume the most pessimistic people on Earth live in war zones or places facing extreme poverty. But year after year, global surveys show the French ranking among the most pessimistic populations in the world, often more negative about the future than citizens of countries dealing with conflict or instability. This is the hidden tax on the French economy: collective depression. Which raises an obvious question. How can a country with 5 weeks of paid vacation, world-class food, and high-speed trains be so unhappy? The answer lies in the gap between expectation and reality. The French are raised on a powerful national myth. They grow up hearing about Napoleon, de Gaulle, the Enlightenment, and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. They're taught they are the intellectual and moral center of civilization.
But when they look around today, they see a country losing influence, a language replaced by English in business, a culture flattened, exported back through Netflix algorithms. It creates deep cognitive dissonance. France feels like a fading aristocrat, still living in a grand chateau, but unable to afford the heating. The velvet curtains are still there, but the rooms are cold. And pessimism feeds on itself. Consumers don't spend because they fear the future, which is why household saving rates are unusually high. Entrepreneurs hesitate to start businesses because failure in France is permanent. Bankruptcy isn't a lesson, it's a scarlet letter. Voters drift toward political extremes because they believe the system is rigged against them. This psychological weight may be the hardest problem of all. You can change a tax law in a week. You cannot change a national mood in a decade. France is trapped in a cycle of decline obsession that makes it almost impossible to rally support for the painful reforms it actually needs. And here's the part everyone outside France should pay attention to. France isn't an anomaly, it's a warning. It's a time machine showing what happens when a wealthy Western democracy runs out of road. Look at the symptoms: an aging population. France hit the demographic wall early, but the US is only about a decade behind. Deindustrialization. France gutted its factories faster, but the American Rust Belt tells the same story. Debt addiction. France's debt-to-GDP ratio is already alarming, yet the U.S. is sprinting in the same direction with trillion-dollar deficits during peacetime. Political polarization. France's traditional center collapsed, leaving a standoff between the extremes. That same fracture is tearing through the U.S. and the U.K. France is the laboratory. It's trying to preserve a 20th century lifestyle with 21st century demographics and outdated economic thinking. If France stumbles, if bond markets finally turn, if Europe is forced to bail out its second largest economy, it won't stay a French problem. It will be global.
Think 2008, but with better wine and angrier crowds. So don't look at France and laugh. Look at it and pay attention. It's not just a country in decline, it's a warning flare. So is France doomed? Not necessarily. This is a country that survived civil war, revolution, occupation, and world wars. There's a deep resilience in the French character that shouldn't be underestimated. There are signs of life. Paris's tech scene is growing. A younger generation is pushing back against old dogmas, trying to build and innovate, despite the system fighting them at every turn. But the math is relentless. The debt is real. The aging is real. The erosion of the middle class is real. France is living on borrowed time and borrowed money. The illusion of wealth is sustained by debt, and social peace is purchased with spending the state can't afford. The question isn't whether the correction is coming, it's when. And the lesson for you is simple. Don't let the postcard fool you. Don't let the luxury brands distract you. And most importantly, look honestly at your own country's balance sheet. Because the French disease is contagious, and you might already be infected. If you want to see who could be next, watch our upcoming breakdown on why Germany is quietly unraveling. It makes France look almost comfortable. And if this shattered your Emily in Paris fantasy just a little, hit like. It helps the algorithm more than a government subsidy. See you in the next one.